Welcome to the CHCI Fall Tech Summit panel, The Virtual Reality of Now. This session is made possible by the generous contributions of our sponsors, Meta, previously Facebook, and T-Mobile. Our panel host for today is Congressman Darren Soto, representing Florida's 9th Congressional District. He currently serves on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce and the House Committee on Natural Resources. Additionally, Congressman Soto is the chair of the Future Forum Caucus, whip of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and a proud member of the New Democrat Coalition, the Problem Solvers Caucus, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and the LGBT Equality Caucus. Welcome remarks will be provided by Sarah Elena Menendez-Mendoza. Sarah Elena leads the XR team at T-Mobile, which evaluates and drives augmented and virtual reality projects, partnerships, and strategy. Our panel moderator is Noni de la Peña, known as the godmother of virtual reality. Noni is CEO and founder of the Emblematic Group and pioneered the walk-around virtual reality with the first ever VR documentary. Please welcome our opening remarks speaker, Congressman Darren Soto, followed by Sarah Elena Menendez-Mendoza.
Hello, I'm Congressman Darren Soto, and I want to welcome all of you to CHCI's 2021 Fall Tech Summit. At the summit, stakeholders, decision makers, interns, and others will have the opportunity to work together to find solutions to our tech challenges of the 21st century. We will explore just how intertwined our lives are to tech policies, practices, and have a dialogue around how to create a more technologically savvy future for the Hispanic community and for all of us. I'm honored to serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee and work on the front lines of tech policy, from artificial intelligence and quantum computing to virtual reality and telehealth, cryptocurrency, blockchain and telecom, commercial spaceflight, internet privacy, and consumer protection. I'm also honored to be the co-chair of the Blockchain Caucus, where we're leading the efforts on cryptocurrency and blockchain technology and policy. As chair of the Future Forum, I work closely with young people and tech companies on emerging issues affecting young people in our future. And as whip of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, I'm proud to be leading the way as a Hispanic to ensure others in our community have a voice in emerging tech policy. Talent pipelines like CHCI are critical to mentor the next generation of policymakers, entrepreneurs, and innovators, to ensure racial equity and inclusion in tech policies for communities of color like ours. And I wish you all the success in your discussions and look forward to hearing your input. And thank you again for supporting the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute and our interns so that we can ensure the next generation has the resources that we will need for the Hispanic community for higher quality of life for all of us.
Hola amigos y colegas, mi nombre es Cerilene Menéndez Mendoza y trabajo para T-Mobile. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you today about the importance of virtual reality, especially as it relates to the Latino community. The promise of XR is to engage in more meaningful experiences that are available to all. It is an opportunity to learn from past mistakes and build something that is equitable and responsible, our collective metaverse future. To ensure these technologies are accessible to Latino Americans, we need to focus on content and connectivity. On the content side, two of the biggest challenges are the need of technical know-how to develop content using Unity and Unreal Engine, as well as the need to develop XR content individually for every headset that's in the market. T-Mobile has worked with companies to provide educators with virtual reality content that can be used to teach algebra, go on field trips to remote places, as well as dissect a human cadaver in a laboratory setting. These projects have been rolled out in Latino and African American communities, empowering teachers and allowing students to learn in a deeper way. Now on to the second challenge. We've recently partnered with Polycam to launch Snapdragon Spaces, an open, cross-device platform ecosystem. which offers a uniform set of augmented reality features designed to be independent of device manufacturer. This means that we're able to reduce the knowledge and cost barriers for anyone that wants to develop XR content across different hardware platforms. All of these experiences are possible with the power of T-Mobile's 5G. T-Mobile made a $10.7 billion commitment to Project 10 Million to help school districts ensure students get the access to connectivity they need to complete their homework and learn. Since the last of last year, we've already connected more than 3 million families. I look forward to seeing how we continue to build an accessible metaverse and how this will impact the Latino community. Muchísimas gracias.
Wow, thank you. Hi, I'm Nani Pena. Good afternoon. I'm the CEO and founder of Emblematic Group, and also we've created Reach.love, which is a no-code solution so that people who are struggling with Unity or Real can begin to build with just buttons. That's Reach.love. So now I'm here to be your moderator and talk to you a little bit about like the virtual reality of now. I've got to thank Congressman Darren Soto for the opening remarks and for setting the context of this discussion for this community. It's really important. We need to be addressing any kind of disparity and inclusion issues, and Congressman Soto is helping lead the way to fix some of the problems we might be having in that arena. And I also want to thank Cerilyn. I mean, really what T-Mobile is doing is fantastic. I'm glad to see that they're thinking across all the technology, content creation tools to make it easier for everybody to get involved in this really nascent but quickly growing medium. So now let me talk to you a little bit about why we're here. The CHCI Summit, which is a really wonderful place for us to come to start to shine a light on the impact of technology on the Latino community. That said, we have three wonderful guests here. First, I'd like to welcome Christina Weaver-Jackson. She is the Reality Labs Policy Manager at Meta. And I'm going to come back to her and everyone else, and they're going to tell us a little bit more exactly what that means shortly after I finish introducing everybody. Now let's welcome Gemma Busani. She's the CEO at Discover Labs. Hi, Gemma. Gemma is here calling in from Puerto Rico, so she's maybe a little hot, but I'm glad that she's willing to sit in her chair and fan and hang out with us because she's got some very interesting things to say. And finally, I want to welcome Marlon Fuentes, and that Marlon is the Global Community Manager at the Looking Glass Factory, which is a super interesting endeavor that I think all of us are going to be keen to learn more about. So I want to start with Christina. Is she still here? Yes. So Christina, could you please tell me a little bit what it means to be the Reality Labs Policy Manager? What is Reality Labs, and what does your day-to-day look like?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to join this conversation and join this panel with such an impressive group of folks, all of whom are really excited about the future, honestly. And to your question, this is what Reality Labs policy is about. So it's no secret, right? Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a big rebrand, a big shift in focus when Facebook changed its name to Meta. And what that really signaled was a shift in focus to developing for the metaverse, which is the internet 3.0, we like to say sometimes. So my team, what we really focus on is looking at future challenges, future policy questions. We have the benefit of sitting really closely to a lot of the engineers and computer scientists within the actual labs, the actual Reality Labs here, that are doing the research and product development and building, kind of this next generation of technology, whether it's augmented reality, virtual reality, or things that will ultimately contribute to the metaverse. So we get an opportunity to look at that work and then compare that against all of the things that we know from policy conversations today, whether it's safety and integrity questions, privacy and data, and different civil and human rights issues, access, equity, all of these really, really important issues that really contribute to responsible design and responsible development and innovation. So we kind of take the opportunity to look at those issues and start these conversations extremely early so that we can have the most collaborative, diverse perspectives weighing in on what it really means to consider these really, really important factors to develop responsibly. So it's actually a pretty fun job to talk to folks like yourselves, constantly sharing research developments and getting inputs for where we should be focusing, how we should be addressing some of these tough questions, so that as technology scales and grows and we start to see newer and more advanced products and services and platforms in the market being used by people, that they enter in a more responsible and safe and thoughtful way. It's really the core of my job.
So I'm also excited to share that I have taken on a new hat as the founding director of a new program on narrative and emerging media at Arizona State University. In fact, in the building, I'm actually in William Randolph Hearst's old offices here in Los Angeles, the Hex building, where we're going to start thinking about not only a graduate program, we're actually starting a graduate program next year, but we're also very keen to talk about research and issues around policy. And I'm going to ask more questions about that as we move forward. So it's really super exciting. I'm hoping you guys will think about ways to work with Arizona State University, which has, the most inclusive student body out there. So now I'm going to go to Jimma. Jimma, you're CEO of your own company, and I know how hard that is and how much work that entails. Tell me about your day-to-day and what you're working on.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gemma. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Discover Labs. We're an immersive education and training company. So a little bit what that looks like is we make content for 3 verticals. So we do K through 12, higher learning, and professional content. So it looks a little bit different for each one of those verticals. K through 12, you can imagine us making King Tut experiences, Rome experiences, anatomy. Higher learning, we work with architecture students. We actually work with universities. We've worked with ASU before. And then professional, that can be anything from military simulations to medical simulations. The one thing that we do know that they all do have in common is that when we immerse people into what they're learning, they do have higher retention rates.
Yeah, super exciting. So moving on to Marlon. Marlon, I think what you're doing is kind of a connector for all of us. But as a global community manager at the Looking Glass Factory, can you tell me what Looking Glass Factory is and what you guys are trying to achieve?
Absolutely. Saludos, mi gente. Marlon here, representing Looking Glass Factory. We ship the world's first 8K and desktop holographic display. So basically, this is a way to experience 3D content, holograms, outside of the headset. And so this provides a lot of opportunities for groups of people, for individuals that are using different types of interfaces for communication or for their own 3D workflow. And on the day-to-day, I'm constantly dropping in the DMs. Actually, I have the fortune of being able to reach out to the global community of creators and essentially bring them into what we're doing, educate them on the opportunities that we provide to support them. Very similar to work I've done in the past. I'm the former global music manager at the Grammys, and same thing. We have incredible technology today to connect to anybody around the world, and so really this kind of flattening distances and bringing people together has been a part of what I've done for many years. Before diversity and inclusion was like a corporate term. This is something that comes from how I was raised, the son of 2 journalists, my mother from El Salvador, my father from Mexico, and I was born in Mexico City. So I take my work very seriously and towards the effort of really bringing the global community of 3D creators to the fold.
Awesome. Super exciting. So I think it's appropriate for this group that maybe we talk about a little bit about policy and how we see what we're doing might fit into that. And when I talk about policy, one of the things that I think super interesting as a concept that I've been obsessing about for a little bit is, should we have in every city or county a technology board? Just like we have a water board or an ed board. When we look at our community still being left out of jobs not giving the positions to, that we represent as consumers in this field, and also still not having the kind of access to broadband, et cetera. Obviously, Christina, you're a policy person. Maybe you can start with that, and then I'd love to hear from the other panelists as well.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's something that I think we at Meta have been thinking about a lot, and really have been trying to work cross industry to think about a lot as well. Is this concept of, especially in the face of innovation like this, right? Immersive technologies that raise all these new questions, is what does governance really look like, and where does governance, where does it fit best? Is it at the local level? Is it a national level? Is it a regional level? Should there be international standards or governance work? Should there be industry governance, regulation? What does that look like? And what is the right mix? I think we're talking to a pretty tech savvy group here today. So, we all know that technology and innovation tends to progress much faster than policy does. So, while having some comprehensive privacy legislation or regulation would be really helpful to kind of set the bar of expectations, industry really has to step in and help kind of figure out what these frameworks and guidelines look like in the interim. And it's really helpful to have input that's contextual, right? And I think the verdict's still out, at least from where we sit, as to what the best way to do that really looks like. But, I think there's value at the community level in making sure that you have that context and that perspective, because everyone consumes technology in completely different ways, and the impacts of technology differ so much community to community. So, I think this is an open question. It's something that would be great to learn more about and engage with more communities about how they perceive to be the best way to do this.
What about you, Jimmy? You think that technology is a basic right, like education, water, energy?
I definitely do think it's a basic right. I actually I'm feeling more passionately about that. I'm actually in El Salvador right now, where they just instigated giving a laptop to every student in the country, which I actually think is
I apologize. I said you were in Puerto Rico. You're in El Salvador. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry for doing that. Wrong place.
No worries. Both beautiful places. But yeah, no, I do think technology is right. Going back to what you said about having like tech councils, I do think that is a fabulous idea. And going to what Christina said about having context, I think that's always important, right? Politicians are politicians, and tech experts are tech experts. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be talking. We should definitely be pushing for situations in which these experts in different areas can come together to solve solutions. LA did actually have a tech council. I was on it, and I think some of the best solutions they ever had was politicians realizing, okay, we actually don't know how to solve some of these things, and it may be very good to bring in other industry experts, people from other industries, and see what they can do. I know that LA had a very large water issue, and so what did they do? They ran a water hackathon. And so they invited all the other industry experts in tech and water, et cetera, to bring them. And I think that was an open moment, an honest moment for Los Angeles to be like, yeah, we don't know what we're doing. We should make this into more of a community discussion. I don't know what exactly the guidelines would look like that for
Okay, so Marlon, what do you think? What's your thoughts on how we can restructure some of our approaches so that we are able to be more inclusive and more equitable?
Yeah, young people today are really looking at their elected leaders and hoping that they represent, their interests. I think in the United States, time and time again, we've seen on television, elected leaders like fumble through questions that have to do with technology. And that's a huge bummer because, I believe that education and infrastructure, technology being a part of that is a right. Not too long ago, I was in Honduras, in Tegucigalpa, participating in Honduras Digital Challenge, which is basically an incubator for startups in the country. And, this is a place where, they don't have the infrastructure that we have. They don't see, VR everywhere. But I think what was very positive about that example, and I hope can serve as a model, to other nations and to other regions is that, where institutions need to step in, to provide these experiences to the community, is very, very important, and I think partnering with technologists, by really understanding the issues, understanding the technology, I think is really kind of the path forward for how we work with institutions, with elected leaders, in order to really manifest the futures we wish to see. So I think that there's lots of great examples out there. There's a lot of focus right now on elected leaders. I know that for younger generations, they're kind of looking at the folks on television and hoping that they do right. So I think that there's many different ways to kind of approach the subject, but I think ultimately, institutions are really a yardstick for social change. They create the visibility for how far along we are, and so inclusion. Making sure that the right people are parts of these groups, and that the aim and the programming that is done is inclusive, and that does take into considerations the real needs. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So the next thing I want to talk about is something I think is also going to be brought up more and more, and people are talking about it. The word is starting to come up a lot. It was just interoperability. So when I talk about interoperability, this is a really interesting question about who we are as individuals, what our digital identity is, as we really look at this growth of the metaverse, right? Which is going to happen. There's no doubt. There's a reason why Facebook became Meta. There's a reason why every smartphone is now letting you capture using your LiDAR camera in 3 dimensions. I mean, we're conversing over something that flattened us from 3D to 2D. Our world is 3-dimensional. So we're going to be just returning ourselves back to that moment. But the question I have on that is, for interoperability means that you're able to take your identity and who you are across this larger metaverse. What do we think that will mean? Is there going to be a sharing of space, of metaverse space, or is this something that we have to can be concerned about because of privacy? Will allowing people to have the interoperability create some more weakness in terms of cybersecurity? So maybe Gemma, do you mind talking about this first? Just because I think that your work, thinking about educational, is important with like how you reach such a diverse group of individual students who need to learn and teachers who want to teach, and how you might think about interoperability within the educational landscape. Yeah, no worries. The first part of the question was, interoperability. What does it mean to have your identity, your own identity, and bring it into the metaverse? So if you're a student and you want to have an identity and you're going to learn about King Tut and you're going to bring your identity in the King Tut experience, or you're going to be able to bring your identity into, whatever other space. How are you appearing as an individual? Then are you able to take that identity and bring it into Meta? And these are complex questions, but I think this is one we're starting to look at right now.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on this, anybody?
Very complex. Yeah, very complex issue, especially when it comes to schools. So most of our, partners are K-12 schools, higher education schools, and when it comes to, security, just like any educational tool that you would use, identity is always a very, very interesting thing to work with. I know when we work with schools, they're not super pro a Facebook account, but I myself am like a digital native, right? I have different identities. I think I have like the identity that I use when I'm gaming. I have my Facebook identity, and then I have an identity for my educational accounts. So, I think I'm going to find people having sort of different sectors for the different maybe metaverses that they're visiting, right? I have a totally different, setup for going online and playing video games in my headsets, as opposed to doing studies and going through training experiences. So I think it's going to be a little different.
Do you think you could take that identity from a Steam-based game and bring it into an Apple game? Should you be allowed to do that? The same identity? Do you have to remake it? Do you have to retake the features? What if you bought digital goods to enhance your wardrobe? You know, you've got some
Right.
NFTs you want to bring along. How are you going to be able to take those into different spaces?
Yeah, I mean, in my ideal world, I would say that you should be able to have a version of yourself online that is true to yourself in whatever way you want, and that can be cross-platform or rather platform agnostic, right? There should be a virtual version of yourself that you can carry across this whole meta world or metaverse in the same world that we, carry ourselves in the normal world. I do, however, think that it is going to be compartmentalized at first. There's going to be a lot of having to jump in between different metaverses before one truly settles, if there ever is going to be one.
Christina, I'm going to leave this one for you for last because it's a tougher one for you, but I'm going to let Marlon go next, please.
Yeah, I think that in a desirable future, I think people have a choice. As my colleague mentioned, there's different platforms, and we've been trained and we've learned to take on different personas in these different platforms. Catch me on Instagram. I'm maybe a little bit more oriented towards culture, media. If you check me on LinkedIn, we're talking a little bit more about professional and industry. And so I think in an ideal future, people really have a choice on how they take their digital persona. That's what I would say.
Christina, like when you talk about worldwide applications, I think that right now you're on one of the top of that game, right? And even if we talk about interoperability and where people can move through that space, do you think we can handle this spatial world that's about to come on us?
I mean, I think so. I think there are a lot of questions, and I think Marlon and Gemma both raised like really interesting points and important points. So I should start by, I think the interoperability piece is, I think, really key here, because if the metaverse is intended to be the next iteration of the internet, the 3D internet up around us, like, it has to be a platform and device agnostic. There has to be ways for people to maneuver from, I think I just saw in Nike Land has like their own metaverse thing now, or Meta's metaverse, whatever that looks like, right? So there has to be a way to be able to do that. But I also think, to your point, when you put that on balance with identity is another kind of complicated issue. There's identity when it comes to like verifying your identity. Like there's integrity piece, that component to identity, right? Being able to know like who someone is and somehow, some way navigating through systems, especially bad actors, to be able to prevent bad things from happening. But then there is beauty in anonymity, or being able to present yourself the way you want to present in a given space, right? I think we've had conversations with a lot of different stakeholders, talk about, different communities, like what if like the trans community, the ability to show up in a virtual space and expressing yourself the way you see yourself and the way you feel about yourself is a huge benefit of the metaverse that we don't necessarily have in the physical world today. But then, there's the other perspective to that is, we've seen the concerns around body image and, self-esteem issues that are raised by, all these enhancements and things that, breed negative feelings about who you really are, what you really look like. So, I think there needs to be room to strike that balance. And, I think Marlon raised a good point, right? Like, I'm not a huge gamer, but I have a lot of colleagues on my team who are. And, one guy's a robot in most of his gaming situations. But when he shows up, we do some of our meetings in workrooms VR. So when he shows up in VR, he looks like the avatar version of himself, right? And the same way we show up to work one way, we go out to dinner with our friends a different way. Having that flexibility and identity and how you're presenting, I think is just core to the like expression and what we want is that's welcoming to people, even with the interoperability features and ability to do that. There's some flexibility and identity, I think, will be important. It's just a matter of getting into the devil of those details and how to strike that balance between like identification and identity.
All right, so now let's talk about giving some specific advice, we hope, to prepare small Latino-owned and women-owned businesses. Like, how can they invest in virtual reality in a way that would be beneficial to them, right? How can they take advantage of what this new medium might have to offer? Does anybody want to take that on?
Yeah, I think it is as mentioned earlier, it is a really exciting time for Unreal and Unity. It has always been an incredible tool, both of those, for any version of the world we've been living in right now. But right now, it is a phenomenal time to learn Unity and Unreal. I used to work at Unity, and I was doing evangelism and VR work for them, and I was shocked by how few Latino communities even are aware of its existence. Even in colleges, I feel like the Unity Ambassador program only started about 3 years ago. So I remember when I've hired technical artists, I go to trade schools, I go to art schools, and it's completely shocking to me that, up until recently, only some schools have kind of, taught Unity and Unreal at four-year universities. And it's usually like that one weird animation side gig. It's not even in the computer science program. So I think that there should be a total reframe on, even before, game developers were getting paid very little, but now there's a reframing of those skills. There's 3D developers, right? There's technical artists who are also empowered a little bit with a little bit of technical skills. They're not full developers, but you know what? They can rig their own animations, they can rig their own assets, and that has brought them into a totally new pay grade. And at the same time, I've seen development of new studios, right? So I think it's a great time to get into that space. If you don't know Unity or an Unreal, it is a little bit of a learning curve, but there's nothing that YouTube can't solve. Unity, I think, was very aware of the fact that they had terrible education content, and they fixed it. Yeah. They put unitylearn.com up, but I do think that it's a pretty exciting time to jump in, especially if you're in emerging countries as well. There's not a lot that you need to do to set up on Unity besides having a strong computer and paying that monthly. But there's a lot that you can do as far as Web 3D, making browser-based worlds, virtual worlds.
Yeah. That exact problem is why we decided to establish this graduate program in emerging narrative and emerging media at ASU. So it'll be up and running next year. So if people are interested in a master's levels, they'll learn some Unity, they'll learn some Unreal, they'll learn some no-code tools, but they'll be prepared to understand how they can apply these new technologies for narrative. But I think, I'm also interested in thinking about what does you're a small business owner, how would they benefit from these new technologies? Marlon, did you have something to say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I can do a 3D scan with my cell phone, of pretty much anything. And I can take that asset and I can bring it into virtual or augmented reality or a holographic interface. Any small business owner that's selling different types of goods, physical goods, can do this to showcase their products online, to create virtual showrooms, to create augmented reality try-ons and experiences of that nature. So I would encourage anyone that to kind of dive in with the tools that they have available. And these days, it's as easy as doing a scan with a cell phone. So one tip that I can offer is this isn't a sponsored plug, but Polycam is a great app that allows you to do photogrammetry. So get started there with your phone.
Yeah, and put it up in Sketchfab, and then you just get a little export. You can get an export that. GLTF. If you export it to GLTF, you can embed it right in your website. So you can have three-dimensional advertising or three-dimensional showing off of stuff. So it's a super fun, available now, really easy to use technology. I'm all for that. Good plug. All right, and then I'm going to talk about a larger, bigger issue. Christina, unless there's something you'd like to follow up on that for small businesses, is there anything you wanted to add before I move on to the next subject? No. Okay.
No, go ahead. Nothing new.
All right. So the next question is, and I get asked this a lot, and I'm amazed that I still get asked this, and I've been asked this even recently, I was asked, well, how can your new program, where you're going to be teaching the technologies that lets people make deep fakes, and therefore are going to more easily be able to sow disinformation. How can we even let you do that in journalism when you're going to actually be teaching things that can help destroy journalism? I was once again shocked by this because, I feel like you could use pencil and paper to write propaganda, right? And you don't need highly, difficult to use deep fake creation tools that I've been playing with. Wiped a computer recently doing some deepfakes, but I'd like to ask, what do you think needs to be thought about when we are making these new products that we're offering to people that make sure that we're thinking about positive experiences and not doing harm? And maybe there's some things you can think about. Obviously disinformation has been a really problematic situation. But I think that has to do with critical thinking and how we get people to look at information with a critical eye. But I'll start, Christina, maybe you can talk about what you think about doing good in the world with these new technologies.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to some of the stuff I think we were talking about earlier. And when we zoom out and we think about the fact that the metaverse is the 3D internet, that added layer, that immersive 3D, three-dimensional layer brings new complexities to a lot of the issues that have been debated and are still top of mind and center of discussion for a lot of kind of internet policy conversations, right? And I think one of the things that I think everyone should be a focus for everyone is, how do we make the metaverse better, right? How do we try to, there are certain things that we can't change, right? We can't change that there are bad people in the world. People do thoughtless, stupid things. There is structural, systemic discrimination. There are disparities across the world that I don't think just one technological development can erase those things. But how do we make sure that the metaverse and this new iteration of the internet is a better place than the old one? And we have experience with the current version of the internet to understand what those issues are and how to start those conversations early to get in front of them, right? So short answers, I don't know that we've mapped the path yet to figuring out how to avoid all the harm. But I think the conversations we're having today, arguably years before a mature metaverse vision really comes to fruition, the fact that we're having this conversation now, we're acknowledging the challenges and the harms that we already know about, work strongly and collaboratively to almost threat ideation around how do we make sure that we're seeing around these corners and putting the right mitigations in place and really following people. I think the core of technology, but especially in this perspective of, in the context of the metaverse and augmented reality and virtual reality, really have to put people at the core of this technology. How do we deliver on the needs and the wants of people? How do we make sure people feel protected?
Right. Yeah, and also draw on the past, right? I was saying also draw on the past. For example, when we first got cameras into the Vietnam War, the footage was being broadcast at dinner time into people's living rooms, right, and dining rooms, and the entire family was being exposed to very brutal imagery. And journalists had to rethink about how they were going to utilize technology, right, and what were going to be the guardrails. So we can draw on some of that stuff from the past to apply to the future. I'd love to hear from either Jim or Marlon, also if they want to talk about what they've been thinking about in terms of trying to make sure we frame things as much as we can with a lens that takes care of our audience.
Sure, I'll go first. One recommended reading for our audience, Future Shock by Alvin Toffler, 1970s, early 1970s. And he talked about future shock as almost like culture shock, right? When people are not prepared for the future that's coming. And so I think what we can do today is to acclimate our communities to these futures that are coming, and to really like be a part of it. I think that having that lens and that critical thinking lens, I think, is really important. And one of the things that Alvin Toffler talks about in his book is that there's no theory of like great economic change without a theory of conflict, right? When the Industrial Revolution came, we had to mitigate child workers. We had to rethink the family structure as working schedules change, and so today, as we move forward with technology, there's going to be more challenges, and the smarter we are in dealing with those challenges, the better off we'll be.
So, Gemma, thoughts on this?
I was just going to say similarly, I don't think it's fully fleshed out yet. I think it's really hard to navigate, especially on different industries, right? Like I work in training and education, and figuring out how to do things and how to do things ethically, I think looks really different in different industries. But just going to reiterate what everyone says, and that's, I think the fact that those conversations are happening is really important. Like I know there have been times when we do professional work that we decide not to be as high fidelity as we can, or we decide not to train certain things because we maybe shouldn't be encouraging that. And there are other companies out there that don't, right? There are companies like Palantir that take really crazy military contracts. But at the same time, there are people who are coming together to have these conversations to start outlining like what is right for humanity and what isn't, and before we would only talk about that in the real physical space, but the metaverse is going to be just as, maybe tangible isn't the right word, but it's going to feel just as real as the real world for us.
Okay, so this has been a really, really interesting conversation, but I think now we're about to turn it over to Q&A. But I'm really, really grateful so far of all this really interesting stuff we've been talking about, and I think there might be one or two wrap-ups, but I'm going to go over and check out what people have been saying for Q&A. Okay, and I think this is a very important question. What support is available to prepare and train future generations of Latino leaders in this emerging field? Gemma, do you want to start with that one because you're working on training? What do you think it's important for training for Latino leaders?
Well, I guess in this industry specifically, I would say there are a lot of opportunities to learn 3D skills. I would say that's only in the last 2 to 3 years. But they're coming, both from Unreal, both from Unity, even Snapchat has programs where they are targeting, Latinos specifically to teach them. And I think that's really exciting because, like we mentioned before, there's going to be so many jobs in the 3D industry.
Awesome. Christina, how does your team and how is Facebook Reality Labs helping try to, bring new faces into this medium where, I know for me, demographic wise, I know what I face, and it has been very monocultural. And it's one of the reasons I took this job at ASU, so that I could try to scale change. Because I was really frustrated having 3 women interns here, 2, BIPOC creators in my studio, trying to help in little bitty ways. And I took this job so I could scale it. Meta has obviously got resources way beyond anything that I have. How can they help?
You raised such a really important point here, Noni. I think there's 2 things, right? There are leaders, there are kind of these existing leaders that have been around for a long time that are, really important voices for like broad communities. But there are a lot of younger emerging voices who, honestly see the world through a different lens. They have different experiences. And at least it's been our experience, especially with these really new emerging technologies, we see some of the strongest leadership from younger generations because they understand the technology more. They see the benefit of it. They appreciate the challenges, are very in tune to like cultural issues and social issues, and are more committed to finding solutions. So, one of the things that we've tried to do as often as possible is just empower that and amplify that, whether it's through programs that support diverse developers and creators to make sure there are pathways for people who are actually building these platforms and engaging in the research to develop it, building the content for these platforms, that they have a space to bring their experience and bring their perspectives into this immersive space. So we've tried to do as much as we can to do that, and we just honestly are continuing to do more. We recently announced a research and investment kind of programs fund, right, at the center of XR, and it's intended to do exactly this, like really touch these like early, new thought leaders, researchers and whatnot, and to bring them into this conversation and to really kind of help us scope what responsible development looks like.
Wonderful. Okay, so how can we address some of the skepticism and opposition that may arise in regards to virtual reality within our own communities? Marlon, you're looking at future shock as one thing that, people aren't prepared for this and they might have that kind of reaction. How do we answer that? How do we answer when they're shocked? Any thoughts?
I think, each one teach one, and I think, with acclimating, communities to, futures, there's a lot of patience involved, but also, the message has to be relatable, and I think that's a really, really key thing. We also have to see we have to see leaders from our own communities in these places, right? Shout out to, I'm here because of people that cared about me and pulled me up. So shout out to Kathy Hackle, Nick Corral at Oculus, people that saw me in my hustle and my struggle to find my place in this space. And welcome me in. And so I think, a lot of the skepticism relies around a feeling of exclusivity. And so if this technology can be inclusive and people can extend, a hand and welcome people, I think, we'll see less fear and more participation voluntarily.
I think it's also knowledge, exclusivity and knowledge. I'm in El Salvador right now, where they just made Bitcoin legal tender, and the local community is shook. It's probably the best way to put it. And I think that would be true for any technology. When you're like massively changing things and people either feel like they don't have access to it or they don't know, right? So like I can guarantee you in even the most modern country, there are people who fundamentally do not understand Bitcoin, right? So if someone were to make that legal tender in your country, like you might feel a certain way about that because you are unknowledgeable about it. But I think evangelism is really the answer, like getting people to understand and to learn the abilities of the technology and what it can bring and what it can mean for your communities, right? So, I mean, I can think of like Verizon, for example. Like Verizon really had to push into Latino communities to encourage them to accept 5G because they had heard all of this hoopla and did not want it in communities. But the moment that, it came in, it massively, helped the economy. It helped local students. It helped people who live in the area. So a lot of it is really, coming to the community and explaining, what this is. You definitely don't want to gatekeep the technology. Evangelism is key.
Okay, let's go on to another question. So how can students or schools prepare for a future working within the metaverse technology field? Should education start at the high school level or earlier? And I know how you feel about this, Gemma, but I'm going to make Christina give us a shot about this because I think that this is something which, when we deal with the sensitivities around teenagers, which I'm sure Meta has, thought a lot about at this point, right? And has gotten a lot of, questions raised about it. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, what we think, when should education around the metaverse start?
Yeah, I mean, I think.
And you've got a 3-year-old. You have a 3-year-old. So this affects you personally.
I have a 3-year-old.
So go on.
I have a 3-year-old who is not allowed to use my Oculus Quest headset because I think he's too young perhaps to understand the difference between what's real and what's virtual. And, kind of to that point, I use that as an example because there's a lot of promise here with this technology. There's a ton of educational opportunities, exposure opportunities. Imagine the ability to go visit, learning history, but in an immersive way, right? As opposed to just on the page text. That can be, really, really impactful for young people. But I think there's still a lot of research to be done at the intersection of the impacts and well-being of young people using the technologies. So, I think it's one thing to use the science and engineering and, different kind of technological studies to kind of encourage like looking at new technologies at a young age. But I think in terms of actual exposure and use, that's something that I think we need a little bit more science to give us more insights into what's appropriate. Like right now at Meta, we don't advise anyone under the age of 13, use these technologies. And that's because we don't know, what those effects could be. And we want it for technology to be good, it has to be safe.
I am a bad mom, because you have to remember I was 3D printing those headsets at the house, and my kids were little, and I was sticking it on them, and they turned out okay. But all I have to say is, one time when I had a headset and I was going through the airport security, and I was with my kids, and the airport security guard was like, "What's this?" And it was like this 3D printed massive thing, and my kids were probably 10 and 8 or something. And he turns to the kids and goes, "Your mom is so cool." And they're like, "Oh, we're so bored of VR." But anyway, so anyway, I'm a little bit less, I'm a little more cavalier, because I do really feel like the three-dimensional world is what we live in, and that all we're doing to return it. Questions become when you start to arise in terms of what's the metaverse part of this, where kind of worlds are they being exposed to, et cetera, et cetera. So I am gonna start to wrap this up, you guys. So it was really, really fun discussion. I really appreciate everybody's comments and deep thinking and being here on this panel. And I'm glad that hopefully we've been helpful to the community that's watching as they start to think about these really important issues. So any last brief comments that anybody wants to make before we end this? Okay.
Thank you, Nani.
Go ahead.
Thank you for hosting.
Yes, I second that. Thank you so much for hosting this conversation. It's been great.
Thank you so much. I hope that we'll can't wait to see you guys in the metaverse. All right. Well, I have to say this has been a really amazing group of people to come and discuss this field that is just really getting going. For those of you who don't know, Apple moved their top hardware guy into their AR/VR team. We're going to be seeing glasses soon that are going to be replacing your phone. This is a space that is just going to explode. So we really encourage individuals who are thinking about their future careers to consider these new spaces and embrace them, and help us and guide us from everything from fun experiences into the policy pieces, right? I, for one, think that technology at this point is become a basic right, like education, like power, and our communities are not getting it with only, I think the number 65% of Latino communities have broadband. We need to change that. We need to shift that. So I think that's kind of wrapping up all this session. I think that we know that Meta is going to have a lot of impact and influence in where we're going. And I think that all of us are going to be curious where they're going to go, despite some people feeling a little bit nervous about what kind of a space we're going to look at. Gemma's fantastic efforts to try to educate in this space is, again, we're going to need some sort of regular, every school is going to need a regular division. It's going to be the immersive division. And whether, the good news is you can just, for AR, you can just go out and repurpose your schoolyard, right? You can just drop dinosaur hunts in your schoolyard, or whatever it might be, right? So this is just starting. And the good news about VR and AR is you don't have to limit yourself in terms of what the space should be. That's one of the great parts about this. And so what Jim is doing, and to think about education, I think is incredibly, incredibly valuable. And Marlon's group, Looking Glass, provides ways that we can put stuff on tables too, right? Just holographs on tables that, again, don't require huge amounts of technology. And if you can think about what kind of a tabletop story do I need to tell, Looking Glass is a wonderful place to consider as a sort of viewing portal. I think the Looking Glasses are really, really interesting new technology to think about. And the other really highlight of this panel is that, we can do this, right? We are a powerful community with a lot of intelligence. Latinos have been early adopters of technology, always, but we're not always brought to the table for investment. I know that I have scrapped for every penny and thing I have done. And I can't tell you how many people I've brought into this field, like, look, Chris Melk. I introduced Chris Melk, and Meta just bought his company. So he didn't do VR before. He came into my studio, and I put the headset on for the first time. Kathy Hackle. She's another person who I supported getting into this industry. So I've seen, both somebody like Kathy Hackle who's like, oh, yeah, come on in, Kathy, and Chris too. But it's been amazing to see how we still aren't represented in terms of investment dollars, in terms of businesses, et cetera. So let's work together, join together, and let's all change it together. Thank you guys so much. It was really fun to be with you.